All of us.
Don't know, you know.
All right, we do have quorum present. So let's go ahead and get started. I know everybody's kind of moving. Hey, Sarah. Thanks. Went to the wrong one. I have 100 High Street. Yeah, there's 2 100 High Streets. There's a blast from the past. I'd like to call to order the Salem-Keizer Area Transportation Study. It is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. Welcome to Hybrid World. And so here. So for the record, on our Zoom for members, we have Anna Henson from ODOT, Sadie Carney from Transit, Trevor Phillips from Salem, Mayor Horning from Turner, present here in the room. I'm Mayor Clark from Kaiser, and then we have Commissioner Wardhorst for Polk County. So we don't, do we have anybody from Marion County? No, not this time.
Just that.
Yeah, gotcha. Like, no, just really.
Sorry.
No, okay. We have staff. All right. Let's see. I'm proud. First item on the agenda today is the approval of the policy committee meeting minutes from April 26th. Any additions or corrections? Sadie.
I did have one. Thank you, Chair Clark. And that was just in the recap of agenda item G, SKATS MTP schedule update. I had asked if we could also review the executive summary and intro. And that wasn't captured in the notes. Doesn't mean we need to, but I had made that request in that portion of the meeting. So for the record.
Okay. Again,
executive summary and intro.
Okay.
Thank
So we'll
you.
be getting those. But anyways, okay, that is in there. Any other additions or corrections? Motion to approve as amended.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Sadie, seconded by Lyle. Anything further? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, signify by saying no. Hearing no objection, motion passed unanimously. Public comment. Anybody on today like to participate in public comment?
No public comment.
No public on the comment. Okay. And there's no public here. Well, no, Sarah kind of, you are alternate for Sadie. So is there anything you wanted to weigh in on? Okay, I'd love to hear, by the way. Okay, then let's go on to the SKATS 2023. So we have a tip language update, Karen.
Yes, unfortunately, we have this opportunity, but it came kind of at the last minute. And so I'm bringing this to you today. So Transit is in the middle of their triennial review. And in that triennial review, they just wonder if we could actually move people off of there.
You can drop that little bar, should drop it to the bottom. On the right of the participant line.
It's that one.
You have a blue square, go over.
Yeah,
There you go.
You just have to do it from that.
Oh,
Yeah.
go over, down, over. Yes, there we go.
There we go.
Love you guys, but you're out of here.
Okay, sorry about that. Just wanted to be able to see you. So anyway, because transit uses our public process for TIP in for all of their transit projects. So when we go out for the TIP, we include their projects, we do all the public outreach. We say that in our PPT, we say that on our website. I did not include it in this document, and that is where transit is looking for this particular language that they,
Excuse me, Chair.
Anna has a question.
Chair Clark,
Yeah.
it might just be me, but I'm really having a difficult time hearing you. At the beginning, you were super clear, but now it's like fading out a little bit.
Is
And
it
I'm
me?
sorry, I would have been there in person, but I didn't realize we were doing this month's in person.
So Anna, is it just when Karen's talking or when Chair Clark is talking as well?
It's Karen right now.
Oh, it was Karen. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I
So,
couldn't even
and
tell.
I'm in
which
the
was-
one spot that can't talk, so I'm gonna have to move. I'm gonna move over here. So I
Thank
need my,
Yeah, I think it was harder to hear when Karen was talking. I
okay,
agree with Anna.
so we're gonna, okay. So at any rate, I wanted to say that the proposed language, now can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, the proposed language that we're adding to the TIP document is basically, we'll be adding it to chapter 10, which is our public outreach and participation chapter. I'm going to add a little paragraph that basically says for the FTA program of projects, and those who don't like acronyms, the acronyms have already been defined at this point. So for the FTA section 5307 public involvement requirements, the public participation plan for the transportation improvement program satisfies the public participation process and timing for the FTA program of projects. The language they want. So this is what I'm proposing. And actually, when we get to the motion, I would like you to say or similar, because I've got to call into FTA to make sure this is the exact wording they want. And if they have something a little different, I want to be able to do that. Oh,
What do you want?
my problem is
Karen, hit escape. Hit your escape button.
I don't want to.
That should work. And
Okay,
then you can just do page down to go between slides.
I just need to get back onto the slideshow. Just a second. My mouse isn't working real well. Well, I'll eventually get there. Sorry. So, but while we're at it, I wanted to add two more things to the tip, things that we never had done. So we adopted the tip last May, and then it was sent to the governor for their signature. We got the governor's approval letter in August. The AQCD also got a concurrence letter from Federal Highway and Federal Transit in September 30th. Those two documents were never added to the adopted tip because they were done afterwards. I just think for nice, clean, and because we're doing an amendment, let's add those as well. So I'm actually, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions on the request to amend the 21-26 tip with these 3 items. And I can't see you, so you got to sing out. Or speak if you don't want to sing. Okay, so we're good there. Karen, there's no questions. You need a formal motion to amend the tip with these 3 items?
Yes, please.
We need a motion to amend the fiscal year 2021-2026 tip with these 3 items, the language in chapter 10, public outreach and participation, FTA program of projects, the governor's approval letter dated August 13, 2020, and the AQCD concurrence letter from Federal Highway and Federal Transit dated September 30, 2020. And if anybody's wondering what AQCD is, it's the air quality determination. Boom. I've been doing this too long.
And can you at least make sure that it's, or similar language? So if I have to adjust that language.
I didn't read the whole language in,
Oh,
so
okay.
I stopped at the federal FTA program of projects. I stopped there. So you can.
Yeah, or similar. Thank you.
Something to that.
I'd like to make the motion to accept the amendment as presented and with the wording is similar as was written.
Thank you.
Second,
So moved by Lyle, seconded by, I think I saw Trevor. Is that
yeah,
correct?
Phillips.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Right.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed signify by saying no. Hearing no objection, motion passed unanimously. Thank you, Karen. Great catch.
Well, thank you for allowing me to get that fixed in time for transit not to have a finding on their triennial review.
Hey, we're all in this together. We're gonna get stuff done.
Karen, do you have any more slides before I start sharing mine or?
No, please. I am done sharing.
Okay, that takes us then to the actual item D, the SKATS 2023-2050 MTP conversation on criteria. And Mike and Ray, this is yours.
So I'm sharing my screen. Thank you, Ray. Before I begin, let me just give you a little background. So back in earlier this year, we talked about the goals for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. We're updating the plan, a long-range plan. Talked about the goals, and then we got into a discussion in March about how we are going to look at projects, and select projects, and what criteria we would use to kind of evaluate projects. And Ray presented some papers and a discussion, and it's not too dissimilar from what we did 4 years ago when we had the plan. We evaluated projects using these criteria. He was recommending a few adjustments. But the policy committee had a long discussion about the criteria, where do they come from, how they're associated with the goals. And listening to the discussion, I realized that we have a lot of new people on our policy committee that wasn't around for the last plan update. So based on that long discussion, and I know I sat down and I was making sure the minutes were very reflective of all your concerns when we had a discussion. I said, let's in May have a longer discussion about where our goals came from, where our criteria came from, so you feel more comfortable that they are based on requirements we have as an MPO. So I'll start with that kind of intro. So our goals, and then after that, the criteria really come from 3 levels: the federal level primarily, but also state and local level. And what I mean is levels, it's like federal requirements, federal plans, federal laws, things like that. So at the federal level, of course, we have the Constitution, but we have laws passed by Congress and signed by the president. We have regulations that are not interpretations, but expanding those laws into more refined descriptions of what federal agencies or recipients of funds are to do with those, to follow those laws. And then we have other documents that come from federal agencies like Federal Highway Administration that are guidance documents, policy documents, etc. These are all things we have to follow as we are developing our long-range plan. There's also executive orders that are separate from laws and regulations that come from the president, from the administration, and they cover things like environmental level, of course, there's state laws that are passed by the state legislature. There are plans developed by the state, like the Oregon Transportation Plan. And at the local level, there are, of course, all the local jurisdictions in their own TSPs, transportation system plans, and their policies in those plans, or other documents that are related to transportation. And then finally, there is the general public that can influence what our goals may be, what our criteria may be, so we take in public input about that. So this is all the various sources of how we develop our goals and what influences those goals and criteria. So starting with the federal level, as I said, Congress passes federal surface transportation acts about every 5 years. And those acts get written into federal law. It's Title 23 of the U.S. Code. There are other federal laws that we have to also be aware of as we develop our plan and become an MPO, be an MPO, operate as an MPO. Things like Title VI for non-discrimination, American Disability Act, American Disability Act, the Clean Air Act. As I mentioned, there's the regulations that follow laws. So there's the Code of Federal Regulations that talk about transportation planning and all sorts of transportation issues. There are specific requirements that get the details of what's in an MPO plan, what's in a TIP. I'll get into some more later on. As I mentioned, there's presidential executive orders. And as I mentioned, the U.S. Department of Transportation has their own set of plans, policies, and guidelines, all based on federal law and regulations that help elaborate on how you might follow those regulations. And then finally, more at a local level, there are federal highway and federal transit agencies that overview the SKATS planning process to see that we are meeting the federal requirements in those laws and regulations. And they look at our annual work program and have questions and make adjustments. And then every 4 years, they review our entire planning program to certify whether it is meeting all those regulations, if there are corrective actions that need to happen for any of our plans. And we've gone over those things with our policy committees in the past. So as I mentioned, at the federal level, there are these surface transportation acts that are passed by Congress about every 5 years. They have the authorizations for the funding program. So every 5 years or so, we're waiting how much federal funds will be, in what categories will they be. But in addition to just the funding programs, there are changes to federal policies with each one of those acts. Some have major changes to policies and eventually regulations. Others are more, they follow on the previous one with more minor adjustments to policies. And in addition to those major policies, there might be more directives of what USDOT and states have to do. So we have to be aware of all those changes with each act. And I'm listing the other acts that have happened over the last decade. MAP 21 in the year 2012 was a very significant transportation act. It had a lot of changes to the way we do transportation planning. The last two acts, the FAST Act had sort of more minor adjustments to transportation planning, and then the more recent one passed in 2021. Not that much changes to how we do federal planning, just maybe a little bit. And then, of course, after the acts are signed into law, the Department of Transportation starts the process to develop guidance first, and then eventually update the federal regulations to follow those laws. A little bit of background about how that works at the federal level. Now, I mentioned MAP 21 was a significant change, and it was because it was written to U.S. law that there's 7 national goals for transportation that are listed on the slide. And these 7 national goals are going to influence how we do our transportation planning significantly going forward. So I've listed them here. I'm not going to read them off, but I'll make a note where it says PM at the end. These goals are associated with performance measures. So later on, when we talk about performance measures, those exist because these 7 national goals were passed by Congress, saying you will focus on these goals. We will try to track performance of these goals over time. Another set of factors that influence how we do our transportation planning are planning factors. So this is written in the Code of Federal Regulations. These planning factors have existed for several decades. They're similar to those national goals, but they have slight, and there's a lot of overlap, but there's slight differences in them. First of all, there's more of them, you can tell, and there's a few that were just added in the 2015 FAST Act. The last two about resiliency and reliability and stormwater impacts were added in 2015. Travel and tourism were added in 2015. So as I said before, each act has some either major impact on planning or some kind of more minor. So MPOs, in cooperation with the states and public transportation operators, we have to develop our long-range plans and tips through a performance-driven, outcome-based approach to planning. So this was what the MAP 21 made a big shift. It is now saying that's how we're looking at things. We want to be performance-driven. We want to be outcome-based. So we have to look at those 7 national goals and those performance measures. We also have to look at the 10 planning factors. Kind of have to combine them all. And as I mentioned before, there's other federal acts and executive orders, Clean Air Act, Title VI, ADA, executive orders that we have to be well aware of. And I'll mention some of these now. The executive order for environmental justice, that's back in 1994. And it started then, but it's been strengthened over time, and the DOT has provided more and more guidance about how that should be used. A new one is this executive order on advancing racial equity and support that we are learning more about, and we'll get more guidance on it, but it corresponds to the equity discussion we've been having for our goals and our criteria. So here in a nice graphic is on the left side, the national goals. So in the 7 ones that are listed and in bold are those national goals that I mentioned earlier. There's only 6 because the 7th is like an efficient program. It's really not planning factors, project deliveries. So I left that one off. It wasn't really a planning one, but so you see the 6 of the 7 there. And in addition, on the left side, the ones that are not in bold are some of the planning factors that come from that other list, or executive orders or other kind of regulations. So it's a mixture of the goals, planning regulations, executive orders, and the colors in these bars kind of correspond to our long-range plan's 10 goals. So you can see the safety and security on the left side correspond to our plan safety and security goal. The infrastructure condition, congestion reduction, connectivity between modes is a planning factor. They align with our preservation goal, our accessibility goal, our multimodal. So that's where a lot of our goals come from. And they do for all MPOs, and they do for the state as well. We are basically restating those national goals or those planning factors as the MPO or state goals. So our 10 are listed here. Oh, is there a question? Yes, Councilor Phillips.
Okay, there. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm seeing that there's a lot of things at play. So thank you for laying out this in all its complexity, and showing what's federal and what's more our local 10 goals. Is there any prioritization within these 7 to 10 criteria? Like, is safety higher than preservation and infrastructure condition, or is it just laid out this way for organizational purposes?
The national goals have no priority. They don't say safety is number 1 and congestion is number 2. They don't order them like that. Neither do our, and neither do our goals. We don't say safety is our top goal.
Okay.
Now, we may put more weight on it when we're looking at criteria, but we're not saying our safety goal is more important than our preservation goal.
Okay, so this is pretty much unweighted. This is just for organizational purposes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Good question. So as I mentioned, MAP 21 had a big influence about how we do transportation planning for MPOs with this performance-based planning paradigm. And in fact, the first thing you see in US Code 150 about the national goals is this declaration of policy that says performance management will transform the federal highway program, focusing on the national goals, improving project decision-making through performance-based planning and programming. In essence, they want states and MPOs to take their funds, fit them into those national goals, use performance measures, and show that we're making progress toward those goals. It's no longer, here's the money, do what you want, try to meet these planning factors, but we won't really oversee anything beyond that. Now they're saying, after many, many years, they said, well, if we're giving all this money to the states, we want to see what the condition of our interstates and our state highways are. How are things changing with fatalities and serious injuries? We want those metrics reported, and and it's not going in the right direction. We want you to set targets that set in the right direction, and we want you to program your projects so you're meeting them. So it's more of a, we're watching you, more of the federal government and Congress saying, we want to see what's happening. So these performance measures, as I said, they're directly related to those 7 national goals. And they fall into these categories of road-related safety, pavement conditions, bridge conditions, system performance, which includes congestion, reliability, and freight, environment, transit state of good repair, and transit safety. Those are the categories. The specific ones might be very detailed, like safety is number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, rate of those 2 items, and one is the injuries and fatalities for non-motorized. So that those get detailed. Those are just 7 categories. And you can see that those national goals on the left, again, those 6 ones I mentioned, how they're related to the performance measures of safety, construction conditions. So we have to do all those performance measures that are on the right. This slide I took from a webinar about performance measures. It's just restating some of the things I said before. The federal acts, MAC 21 and FAST Act, establish those goal areas. US DOT set those measures in final rule. Number of fatalities, non-motorized fatalities. So they kind of set what those measures will be. DOTs, MPOs, public transit have to set the targets for those different performance measures. And then DOTs and MPOs have to include those performance targets in the plan. And then here's a key one, link investment priorities to the performance target. So they are looking for us to say, in both your plan and your TIP, how are those projects that you're including, how are they linked to those performance measures? And then consequently, how are they linked to the national goals? And reporting on progress. So we've been having meetings with ODOT and other NPOs about our next reporting period. We have to report our targets and how we're doing it. We don't have to report how we're doing it. And to kind of drill down even more, here's just one example of a target. So here is target from 2018 that ODOT submitted for just 2 of those measures. This has to do with infrastructure conditions. So this is the percent of the bridges on the national highway system in good condition, that's the blue row, and the percent of the national highway system bridges in poor condition. And that's how they rate the bridges. They have it good, fair, and poor. You only have to report the good ones and the poor ones. Fair. So they set these targets up, and they have to send them as official targets to US DOT. Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, just for clarification. So who sets the measures? Who decides how to measure these things? I think I missed that somewhere.
Okay. So the US DOT in their final rule,
Would you mind repeating the question? I'm sorry, Mike.
she asked who determines the measures you report on. There is some flexibility, but believe that the original measures are set in final rule. MPOs could add measures, they could go a little beyond it, right, Greg? Didn't we talk about some other measures?
The measures are written in US code or the CFRs, and they define, how to measure a bridge condition, how to measure the pavement conditions, which things go into it, et cetera. And then the flexibility for the states, the DOTs, and the transit districts is setting the targets specifically.
Yeah, that's target. So I know Metro was thinking about potentially different measures to report on in
Well,
addition to.
people can always go above, but that's not what not reported to the feds.
So the feds are going to say, you have to do these set. If an MPO want to do other ones, they could, but this is the set of measures.
The feds set the standard of measures, and then MPOs may set additional if they so choose.
For their own benefit, for reporting to the US Department of Transportation, you've got to hit these.
Right.
Right.
Just,
And
just repeating back.
right, and that is going to be your grant requirements for getting the dollars from US DOT, which are the dollars that we are disseminating.
So we have to set these targets. Now, what we've been doing, we could have established our own targets, and we went through a process a couple of years ago, like safeties. And we looked at our safety rate, and it got very complicated because the number of fatalities we have changes quite a lot from year to year. So looking at the trends was maybe not the best way for us to set targets. So for almost all our targets, we are just supporting the state targets rather than having our own.
Currently, all our targets. He's foreshadowing a little bit.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you.
But there are some, there's the SOP one. Anyway, my main point is that these performance measures exist. There's a reason they exist, and as I mentioned earlier, they're mostly looking for us to select projects that try to achieve our target, make progress toward achieving our target. So this complicated graphic I've seen in a lot of reports from Federal Highway. Don't worry about the details, but I'll just say that the idea is that as part of a cycle, you want to set goals and objectives in your plan and set performance measures. And then you want to identify projects you want to program in your planning tips, implement those projects, monitor them, evaluate them, see if they're making differences in your trends. So if we implemented a whole bunch of safety projects in our area, after a few years monitoring it, will we see any changes, positive, negative, or none, and number of fatalities, number of serious injuries. So it's a continuing process for us to set those goals and set those targets, and then see how our projects influence those. So that's the federal side. On the state side, we have Oregon laws, plans, and policies. So there are, of course, a lot of laws. The ones that are kind of relevant, especially for our goals, and state quite a bit, is Oregon statutes that set reductions for greenhouse gas reductions. They started in 2007 with a whole statewide goal, and then specifically for transportation sources, Senate Bill 1050 2009 set the ball rolling for rules that would reduce greenhouse gas reductions statewide, but also within metropolitan areas. Then, in addition to state statutes, Governor Brown passed her executive order 2004 for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That set the ball rolling for a lot of state agency action, from DEQ, ODOT, PLCD, and about, 16 or 17 more state agencies, all given the directive that we will do everything possible to implement this executive order. Then there are goals and policies in the Oregon Transportation Plan and the OTC strategic plan that we want to make sure we're coordinated with, so that we're aligning strategy and policies. So Right now, the Oregon Transportation Plan is being updated. It hasn't been updated since 2005. 2005. They're in the middle of updating, as I mentioned. Here from May is their proposed goals on these categories, and you can see they're similar to the federal goals: mobility, safety, social equity. Not identical, but similar. Economic vitality and livability, that was one of the federal goals. And then, as I mentioned, there's local jurisdictions in the public that influence how we may want to set up goals. So, of course, in our last RTSP update, we had a long discussion amongst ourselves, as representative of the MPO, about what those goals, objectives, and criteria should be. We had vigorous discussions about it. We decided to add explanatory statements to explain what that goal meant. And then we had a long discussion about the criteria and how it matched up with our and you might remember, I know Chair Clark remembers, we did some surveys for our goals. We got public feedback. We had people come to our meetings, the MPO meetings, and give us their opinions about our goals. Then there are our local jurisdictions. I just picked Salem because they have been going through, a process to set some goals for reducing greenhouse gases as a city. So they set some goals to meet as part of their climate action plan. Very aggressive and ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gases as a city, not just from transportation, but transportation is a major component. And now they have a climate action plan that was still being discussed at the city council level. So, in kind of summary, where do we get our goals and criteria for our SKATS Metropolitan Transportation Plan? They come from all these factors: the national goals, planning factors, performance measures, the requirement to show how our plan and our TIP making progress toward those performance measures. In addition, we have to follow executive orders, things like environmental justice, new racial equity executive order. And then I didn't mention this earlier, but there's the whole 3C paradigm of planning: coordination, cooperation, and continuing planning work, both as an MPO, but with our partners, federal level, state, and local level, continually working together to coordinate our efforts. So that gets down to something you saw back in March, which is our criteria. How we're going to look at all our projects, try to evaluate those projects against these criteria, and how those criteria match up with the goals that are shown in the right. So you've seen this before, but have to answer questions. We're not going to go into a long discussion about criteria. That's reserved for July, I believe you said, Ray? July and August. So we're going to get more into that then. But just as a refresher, a reminder, this was the criteria you were shown before, how they align with the goals. I've got a second slide here that shows some more criteria. The ones highlighted in yellow, the top one is we did have an equity criteria before, but we're revising it slightly, our approach to looking at equity as a criteria. And then environmental, because the FAST Act added stormwater and resiliency as planning factors, we added this criteria to align with that planning factor. So last two slides. Why do we have this project selection criteria? Why do we have it again? We have it to develop and use the criteria to evaluate the projects during the project selection process. So all those projects we have in our plan, we want to evaluate them in some process. And then we want to have that process to show how that project selection process is in compliance with the federal performance-based planning policy, federal law and regulation. In other words, when Federal Highway and Federal Transit say, how did you put together your project that spoke for your plan and you said what process you follow? Say we followed a process that is made up of many things: national goals, planning factors, performance measures, and try to advance achievement of those performance measures, and executive orders, you know, what's going on in the state, all these influences, all these factors or these sources influence how we select projects. And last slide, and my staff reminded me to put this in, that this criteria exercise is a good one for a number of reasons. One, you can see how these projects evaluate, you know, whether a project meets many criteria or just one, for example. But it won't be the only way to select projects. When we did this exercise 4 years ago, we said, we're going to go through this process with the 220 projects in the tip. But if there's something in there, your jurisdiction, you say, I really, really think this project needs to be in our, even if it didn't score in the top, you know, 100 or whatever the cut line. We said, there are legitimate reasons for the project, even if it didn't score high. There is, right? Just whatever it score high. So this criteria won't be the only way to select projects. We'll talk to you and you have final decision about what goes in the plan. And lastly, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're going to review this criteria in more detail at the July policy. So I wanted to show you the criteria and the background and how it developed it. Try to, but not in detail about the specific wording or the weighting of each criteria. Just so you feel more comfortable that it just didn't come out of thin air. You know, that it's very tied to all these things I mentioned. And with that, that's my last slide.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you because when you said that it's been a while and there's new people, I didn't realize, but I just kind of did a mental roll call and I'm the only person left on SKATS who was on the 28th. I think it was Craig. Yep. So this is a great review for everybody, get everybody on, you know, up to speed, if you will. Sadie, I see you have a question.
I do. Thank you, Chair Clark. I'm trying to thread together all the things here. So apologies if this is kind of a basic question, but when we're using the criteria to score the projects, it comes from the technical advisory committee first. They do their own scoring and prioritization on the projects, and then they advance recommendations to the policy committee, and we can either disagree or agree with the recommendations of the technical advisory committee. Is that right?
I'm gonna let Ray.
Yeah, so staff does the initial scoring for all the projects based on the information provided by the local jurisdictions. The TAC then reviews the scoring, and that either takes 1 or 2 months, and then they will propose a list of projects, and it goes to the PC, and that's when you guys have 1 or 2 meetings to decide on which the project lists are.
Mhm.
That also that conversation also takes into consideration financial constraint and how much money is available. So it's a multi-step process.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. And this presentation was helpful, as was the staff report. So thank you both. I'm just going to make another plug for my Google weary fingers. If we could link to the relevant reports that we're using to support the information that's included in the staff report, that would save me a lot of Google searches, and I would very much appreciate it. And then just a final thought, we probably need a really long meeting in July.
I hope not.
July will be a long meeting anyway, besides this.
Yeah. July will be very long.
Yeah, I mean, we may want to consider.
It will probably continue over multiple months.
Right. Well, we'll work on breaking this up because you know, we have people's schedules that we'll have to work around as well. So we'll do some planning to make sure that this is reasonable and in less than elephant-sized chunks.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Steve, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was a slide about 3 or 4 slides ago that talked about it had Salem's maybe getting there. You go. City of Salem goals and City of Salem Climate Action Plan. How does that relate to not Salem? And so if we're adding structure and guidelines, is there any chance that there's a ripple effect negative to where you have a small little town and you have an overriding, I don't know, restrictive structure? And I'm going to tie in right now that we're working on the water system with Salem. And so it was mandated that we need to deal with the green algae, so on and so forth. And so there's some things that are strictly Salem, but the water flows through Turner, for example, and we have to put in a $4 million pump station. And so is something like this, where it says City of Salem, is that quantitative for everyone, or just City of Salem and the titles? And then a follow-up question to that is that some of these, it looks like the additions we're making, are those required by the federal government? Because it was under my understanding that we can actually, as each project comes up, those criteria are reviewed on a project by project basis. And so to go through a process to say, what about this? If we add this, do we have control on a per project basis?
Well, that's a very good question, or a series of questions, I tell you. As I said before, there are different influences of how we set our goals. And Chair Clark will remember this. When we set the goals last time, it was the City of Salem that came in and was a strong advocate for us, including greenhouse gas reduction as part of our growth goals. We had many discussions about that. So right now, at the federal level, according to current law and the planning factors, that is not a current performance measure. You didn't see reducing greenhouse gas performance measure. However, following what's going on with the new administration, there is a strong possibility that it might be added. I think it's out for comment right now about doing that. A notice, right?
Just a notice, but
Okay.
they haven't.
Oh, okay. So originally, greenhouse gases was going to be a performance measure, but the Trump administration, they took it out of their notice. Now with a different administration, it may go back. So right now, it's not required. But as I mentioned earlier, the federal requirements are one thing, but also we are working with our state partners and our local partners. So of course, the state has a strong preference to have transportation emissions reduced. So far, at state level, but also they want the metropolitan areas to have targets, which were initially voluntary targets. But now, with the changes by the Land Conservation Development Commission, those are going to be metropolitan areas targets that are required to be met by the cities and the counties within metropolitan areas. And there's a distinction. There's a distinction. The state can't tell the MPO what to do, but they can say what the cities in the metropolitan area should do. So, while another way, so there's no federal one right now for greenhouse gases. No federal performance for greenhouse gases. But there is definitely policy language by the federal government to reduce greenhouse gases. And there's definitely policy and law at the state level to reduce greenhouse gases. And then at the local level, the City of Salem has obviously taken the policy level to reduce greenhouse gases. So the question is, as an MPO, do we want to have reducing greenhouse gases as some part of our long-range plan?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different turn on this. City of Salem, by putting their climate action plan into place, they will use that as part of their planning tool to decide what projects they're even going to put into the competition for federal dollars. So that is City of Salem saying, this is what we want to do. City of Salem can't tell Turner, you have to pick projects based on the same criteria. Turner, you need certain things, you're rural, you're in a different situation. You still have to meet the transportation planning rule, but anything that Salem has done does not say that you have to use the same criteria. So, and I think that was a little bit at the heart of the question, if I read it correctly. So we can, as individual jurisdictions, say these are our priorities in how we select the projects from our transportation system plans to be considered for the regional plan, the projects we want to push forward or to put forward in our different jurisdictions. So I did want to clarify on that. And then I had one other thing and kind of one up.
I'll just add that the transit district, is another obviously member of the MPO, and they are, I don't know exactly where the status is. They're developing a climate. Sadie, maybe you can help me. That the board is developing a sustainability policy and a climate policy. Is that what they're doing?
I think, yeah, transit's in the process of a strategic planning, correct?
Yeah,
That's-
yeah.
That
And
includes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, thank you, Chair Clark, and Mike. That's correct. We are in a strategic planning process, and I know that our board members, at least at our last board meeting, were very motivated to put climate action as a priority of the transit districts, in part because that has really helped us in our low-no grants at the federal level over the last several years in electrification of a fairly significant portion of the fleet.
And now with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're getting a new category of funds, carbon reduction funds. And wouldn't surprise me if, because we're getting those carbon reduction funds, at some point there may be some kind of reporting of what we're doing with those funds, just like the CMAQ funds. And then not just reporting what we're doing, but maybe even estimating the benefits.
I get money for a sidewalk. I don't care what you call it, just give me the money for the sidewalk. I'm going to go to Sarah, and then Trevor, I'll come to you.
Now, let me know if I'm getting ahead of everything, but I think it outlines the review to go to the goals section, and I think I know where we pulled everything from, but can you clarify what regional indicators are from those sheets? I noticed some goals have them, don't. Where do those come from?
The regional indicators were developed in about 2011 when it was clear that the federal government was going down the performance measure highway, as it were. And so we developed a number of regional indicators that was encompassing, what's happening in the system. Give us an idea. Since the federal government came out with all the performance measures, they've been supplanted for the most part by they've been supplanting all the regional indicators. So that's why the number of regional indicators is fewer and more limited. So it's just on the parts where the feds have not actually they don't have performance measure for sidewalks or bike lanes or things like that we can easily measure and show progress. So the indicators are mainly to show how the investments that have been made are resulting in getting towards the regional system that we espouse in the plan.
Are those things that we're not looking to update or making because they've been circumvented by the performance measures now, or are they open to adjustment over time?
Well, and like all the safety ones have been, we've pretty much taken the safety regional indicators out and put in the middle, so that we can, have a discussion of which ones, other ones are necessary or not.
Okay.
And if there's data available, that is the
Right, and if
limiting,
there's data available.
that is the limiting factor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor?
Did you call my name?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thanks. So more comments than questions. Staff can correct anything if they hear an egregious mistake on my part. So the city of Salem, before I was on council, adopted their targets at 2035 and 2050 to be 50% reduced by 2035, and then I think 100% or fully carbon neutral by 2050. I believe that passed unanimously at city council. Prior to that, they conducted a climate audit that kind of looked at the sector-based production of greenhouse gases. And I believe that 53% of the greenhouse gases within the city of Salem limits were from transportation, that sector. So right now where we're at is the city council has accepted the climate action plan. And we've got a subcommittee looking at, the implementation in a, maximal efficiency, biggest bang for the buck kind of situation. The accepted climate action plan has like 183 or 186 strategies. And that's more than the city and staff can do at one time. So, where we're at now, to the best of my understanding, is that staff has looked at some of the top 55 strategies within that and is trying to prioritize, what we work on. Within that top 55 strategy, there's 25 to 30 things that we're already doing or have already done. So what staff's trying to do is look at what's the next, 5 to 10, 7 to 12 strategies to do that gets us the most in the shortest amount of time. So it's a work in progress, and I just want to give people that information for moving forward here. But it is my understanding that we're really focusing on things inside our city limits. So I don't know if that helps answer Steve's question from earlier, but that's my understanding of where we're at. I'm on the committee for the implementation plan. I was not on the climate action task force.
Thank you. One more, Sadie, and then we'll go on to our next agenda item.
Thank you, Chair Clark. So when it says that our MTP must be consistent with federal regulations and state plans, we talked about some of the slides, talked about them, and I don't think the slides are in our packet, or at least they didn't seem to be available through what I got. But does that include like the statewide transportation strategy from ODOT? I mean, maybe that's a question for Anna. I'm not sure. I'm wondering what the state plans are that we're answering to in the MTP. And then I just wanted to chime in and say, Chair Clark, I think you're absolutely right. The city of Salem can't tell the city of Turner what to do, but I did find the language in the staff report to maybe not quite line up with the newly adopted rules, which of course are not maybe effective until the 1st of June, but the climate friendly and equitable communities rules kind of change the relationship between the MTP and locally adopted plans. They don't anymore say the locally adopted plan must be consistent with the MTP. It says the two plans must agree with each other, and then there's a statutory reference to what form of consultation takes place if the plans are not in agreement. And I do think that's a shift that has potential impacts for this. But just back to the question at the top, sorry for the segue, was what state plans are we agreeing with? Did we move too quickly through that slide for me, or is that something we can enumerate?
Well, we'll see. First thing that comes to mind is there are many plans at the state level, many plans at the state level. And we're a planning organization, so we look at the ones that are planning level, right? So that statewide plan for emissions reduction is a plan, and we should be consistent with it. If we were truly following that direction that MPO plans and state plans. Now, in practice, things are never ever always consistent, just because so many plans are developed over the years, and we update our plan every 4 years. In that time period, plans come and go. New plans are developed, old plans are proceeded. So we'll probably be listing the major state plans in Chapter 2 policy. So we'll list all those plans. But to adjust our plan to specifically be consistent is times more than we can possibly do.
Well, I would just say in Chapter 2, there is a list of the state policies and regulations that we are consistent with or that influence what the local jurisdictions that make up SKATS have to follow, which includes the statewide transportation strategy and the Oregon Transportation Plan, and eventually the revised TPR and all those related goals. And so that's some of the state goals plans are more relevant to the local jurisdictions because they are directly targeted to address what they need to do planning wise.
I think we're most concerned is to be consistent with federal law, federal regulations, primarily, but be as consistent as we can with state plans and regulations. Well, and then local ones. So there is kind of an order. We're kind of graded, as I mentioned before, by USDOT about whether we're meeting or not meeting federal planning regulations first. They don't look at to see how consistent we are with all the state plans.
I'm gonna give Lyle the last word since he's been quietly waiting.
And I just want to say, over the years, has there been any issue with the criteria we've been given, the jobs or the projects placed in front of us? So the criteria we've used to rate projects and put them in is very similar to what we're looking at now. It's just now they're trying to fine tune and add more description to the wording, but it still means the same stuff. This is all really basic thought. We're not going to go in and we're not going to take away low-income housing to put in a roadway. It doesn't make sense. There's a housing shortage. So common sense will prevail. And all of this is just trying to find more detail to keep us all on the same path. What the city of Salem passed is the city of Salem's future. That's their choice. It doesn't go outside the city limits. Salem has no criteria or boundaries beyond their city limits. That would be the county or other neighboring communities. They get to set their own goals and their criteria and their ratings. All of them have to meet federal standards, which is if you're going to give federal money, you've got to meet this criteria. The rest of us, we got to do ourselves. We can add more layers if we wish to, or we can try and simplify it as possible because we all live in our neighborhoods and the projects that we move forward, the ones that we know living here, need to be addressed for safety, for economic development, for transportation, removing bottlenecks, for bicycle and pedestrian. Salem is way ahead of so many other communities in all of it though, because we've always kept those in the forefront. So as we move forward on this, let's try to keep that in mind. All of this is just literally wording on a piece of paper. We're still going to take a look at a project. We're going to score it accordingly. But when all of us live here, we all see them on a regular basis. And we'll know what to do in the right thing. So, and we need to keep this meeting moving. So bringing it a lot deeper later on, I understand, next July in this one here.
Yep,
So let's move on to the next one.
all right.
One quick comment. You received chapters 2 and 3 in your packet. 2 was not meant, the discussion that's just listing all the policies, supportive of what Mike was talking about. Chapter 3, you'll see again later this year or next year. Draft, if you have any comments on the formatting, especially this time, all the goals have been laid out so you can see the goals, performance measures, all the supporting bits that the goal is going to. Based on the conversation from last time, I think we tried to make this more explanatory and more easy to understand why we do what we do. So if you have comments on these, please let me know, and we'll talk about them in the future meeting as well. Thanks.
Right. Much more work ahead. All right, so let's go on then to item E, which is follow up on the April Policy Committee meeting. That was in the, I believe that's lavender.
So that's back to me. So to let you know that we want to follow up with any recommendations you bring to us. So we adopted the Unified Planning Work Program, but there were comments about the document that I made changes to, including a graphic that had public involvement as part of that graphic. That's one that you have recommended. We added Appendix G, which is a condensed description of the transportation model. I forget who exactly asked for that. Who asked for that? I forget who asked for it. But someone on the policy committee asked for a description of how the modeling works. So it's an appendix. I have a link to our UPW that we adopted with those changes on our website. So if you want to look at either the graphic or the description of modeling, it's on our website. The second item was the cooperative agreement and the TAC. So there was a question about, I think it was Arnie about, is the TAC directly noted in our cooperative agreement? And so this is the answer. The cooperative agreement doesn't specifically state that the TAC should be. It was first developed back in 19. But the bylaws that happened soon after that cooperative agreement that we want to have a TAC. We want to have staff level advisory committee. So it was formed back in 87. That those bylaws, which are in the packet, have been amended a number of times, 4 times since then. And then the TAC itself has bylaws that were approved by the policy committee. It lists its membership, how it votes, etc. So all that's in your packet if you want to know more about the TAC and how. And then lastly, we've had a number of discussions about Citizens Advisory Committee. Kim, who is currently on vacation in Africa, was assigned that task because she has led our public participation plan development. She's our person who is going out, doing things, sending things out for the public. So I tasked her with writing a paper of the options of to form or not the staff level. We've had a number of discussions about it. And we want to bring you back something that is well done that says, here are the reasons either have one or not have one.
Or what?
Or options. So when we have that done, we will present it to the policy.
All right. Thank you for the follow-up on all of those. And I hope she brings back some very cool pictures. Okay. Fantastic. Sadie, you had a question?
I did, and it's just, I was looking at the organizational membership of the Technical Advisory Committee. And I know that there's voting and non-voting members, and it seems like unlike our policy committee, the cities double up, the counties, like all the elected doubles up. Well, not all, because of course the school board is elected. The transit district is now appointed. But those still have one representative, and then kind of state agencies get, well, except for Turner. Turner stays at 1. But is there a reason for that? Why we have all these voting members, but the representation for Salem and Kaiser and Marion County and Polk County is doubled in terms of its parity on the policy committee?
I think it's a recognition that, what we do for transportation planning is both a transportation and a land use connection. And so we wanted to have staff that are involved in transportation, which is the public works department, but we wanted to have people from the planning department, especially when we're looking long range and we're doing our land use forecast. We want to have someone who's in the planning department help us with that. So that's why we have planning staff from Salem, Kaiser, and the county, and the 2 counties. Of course, we have. Do we not have Turner on this list? There they are. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's on the thing.
You just have the Turner City Administrator or designee.
That's right. So I don't know if Turner wants more than one person on our.
Turner doesn't have a planning department and a public works
Yeah.
department that they can afford to give somebody, the time for.
And then just so that I'm clear, Marion County isn't everything within Marion County that's also within the MPO. It's everything outside the cities of Salem and Kaiser that is Marion County and inside the MPO. So it's sort of like a
Right.
little,
That's
okay.
what
And
they're
the same
focused
for Polk.
on. Right. That's what they're focused on. That's within our MPO bound.
Okay. So let's go to item F, which is the summary of the May 13th OMPOC meeting. I was not able to attend because of work. And turns out Lyle couldn't attend because of life. That leaves it to Mike.
I'm sorry. I was looking at Sadie's question. I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay.
Ask me again.
OMPOC, because we're on to item F.
I'm sorry. I was reading his question.
Okay.
Distracted. So OMPOC met about 10 days ago, the 13th. And So we had a presentation from ODOT about the update to the Oregon Transportation Plan. It started quite a long time ago, and they have a policy coordinating, quite a big committee made up of the chair of the OTC, the chair of LCDC on that, other representations of all sorts of both government, private business, public interests, environmental interests, probably a group of them. And so what our staff is working on them. The transportation plan is basically a policy document more than a, here's what we want to build. So they're setting policy. And I showed you the goals earlier that they're developing. So it's sort of like our long range plan absent projects. What are the policies? Now they will have a highway plan also developed. It's more specific to highway projects, just like they have a pedestrian plan and a transit plan. So the Oregon Transportation Plan is this big umbrella, the policy level, and then the different plans focus on highways, transit. So they are still discussing policy. I haven't watched any of those meetings. I haven't had time to watch the coordinating committee describe policy. I figured I'd let them have those discussions, and when they're getting towards the end, chime in or tune in a little bit more. They're scheduled to have a draft plan around November, and to go out for public comments. Likely before that, they might take it to the OTC for discussion with them. And also the next
project website for the Oregon Transportation Plan work group.
They do. I was looking at it this morning. So you just type in Oregon Transportation Plan update. You'll find the website. And you can drill down. I was doing this morning. I was kind of drilling down to kind of take a look at their agenda, where they are, and their schedule.
Okay.
I think there's some links to the videos if you want to. The next one was a rather long discussion about the rail crossing item at Ompok. So a little bit of background. For many, many years, local agencies and even ODOT have struggled with the railroads on a number of issues, particularly the issue of crossing. So, but also an issue with ODOT itself, because I think a lot of local governments were feeling that ODOT may not have been representing them enough, strongly enough, or ODOT wasn't responsive enough to their concerns. So Amy Ramsdale heads ODOT's Commerce Compliance Division, and that covers freight vehicles, but also covers rail as well. So she came to Ompok, and I don't know how long Amy Ramsdale's been ahead of this, but she did say that she couldn't address things that happened a couple of years ago, or their own agency being less responsive. But based on what they're hearing from locals, and also what they heard from Ompok, they're taking a more proactive stance to, with all their staff, be more responsive to these issues. But also, they are meeting with other state departments, state rail departments, that are having very similar issues. So his name is Chris. I don't have his last name. Chris Amon is the state rail safety manager. He was also there saying that he's been contacting rail managers in other states. There's a group of about 26 that are actually an organization, and he's reaching out to some other ones. And he's finding everyone's having the same issues about rail crossings, about the maintenance fees, the kind of sometimes tough lack of cooperation by the major railroads. And I have lots of notes from this meeting. In addition to what Amy was saying about what ODOT wants to do, they are working with the Department of Justice in order to firm up what Oregon can do with the railroad. So there is Oregon revised statute with policy about what ODOT is responsible for these rail crossings. So they do crossing orders. I'll ask you to describe what crossing orders. There's a rail crossing order negotiated between the local government or the state and the railroads. And one problem in the past has been that they might be a crossing order, but is the railroad abiding by that crossing? Or are they saying, no, we don't like it, so we're not going to do it? So they are taking a more proactive stance, saying we're drilling down to this, working with the Department of Justice. We're going to, I think they might be using the Eugene crossing example to as a test case of how they might go forward in case the railroad are not in agreement or not complying with the crossing. So it's a long story. There was discussion about our Tompock letter going to our federal delegations has got their attention. State rail manager, he's having meetings with higher level staff of the Federal Railroad Administration. So things are moving. So it was a very good feedback report back to Tompock that they heard our concerns, they read our letter, they read all the examples of problems each MPO area has had. They read about the maintenance fees, how crippling that could be. So they are taking more action. I guess we have to wait and see exactly what. Very good thing that you wrote that letter.
I want to make sure that everybody understands why this is so difficult, dealing with rail, because the amount of jurisdiction we really have over rail, pretty much zero. Yeah. And that's the way it was created all those years ago. Yeah, rail is king. Yeah, pretty much. And they don't mind telling you so. Not exactly a collaborative relationship. Is that fair to say?
It's been difficult. It's been strained. There's no doubt about it.
A little bit.
Very PC, sir.
And the funny thing is, as someone brought up, there is this kind of friction with the railroads on these crossings, but they have to also cooperate. The state has to cooperate with railroads for the passenger rail, Amtrak runs, what the state runs on the rail lines. Right? Other rail lines own those rails.
Mhm.
So it's a complicated relationship with railroads.
It's
Complicated. Amanda Peets, who's ODOT's planning manager, and some of her staff are there to talk about the OTC, and they passed their distribution of federal funds from IIJA, $412 million. So now they're starting to implement some of those programs. So you've heard of the Great Streets program. I brought that up a lot. The carbon reduction program, innovative mobility program. So they're starting to work through how they're going to implement these programs. So for Great Streets, I think I'm going to talk to our TAC members about are there ODOT facilities? The Great Streets is just for ODOT facilities, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it's just for ODOT facilities.
We tried. We tried.
You can ask Commissioner Brown about it. Maybe anyway.
I would just like to interject, we have a very esteemed ODOT participant on our staff that I'm sure can pull strings and make things happen.
Go Anna, go Anna.
Thanks for the cheer, Lyle.
Okay.
What was encouraging about this Great Street program is that it's a proof of concept. And a pilot, he said, it's a proof of concept and a pilot for future work. This is the Azim Sadie, who's worked for Amanda. He's leading the Great Streets program, which makes me hope that even if this Great Streets program is initially for ODOT highways, maybe they'll expand it to non-ODOT highways. Even in the immediate future where ODOT highways, we have some ODOT highways that need some attention. I mainly think about the Salem Parkway, maybe bits of Wallace Road,
You're here.
and
Highway 22, Bunker Hill. 99W, 21.
Yeah, but they're looking at, this Great Six program is looking at arterials, urban arterials, not highways, urban arterials that are state
Street,
emissions. So, I mean,
Commercial Street, Liberty Street.
yeah, but those aren't state highways. Those are state.
51 to Independence.
Yeah. Highway 72 is Salem Parkway, Commercial Liberty, down around Mission Street. Yeah, that is, but other parts.
There we go.
Uh,
That's a great street to work on.
Yeah,
Oh, yes, Sarah.
Very basic question. Is there a place I can look up who owns what? Because like you're saying, oh, that isn't belong to this. And like we had the conversation recently about who owned which stoplight. How could I go and find that information out if I
That
haven't?
has a Trans GIS website, and I'll send the link or I'll have Lori send the link out later today.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Power of GIS is epic.
Because I mean, it's great that you guys have that knowledge, but I'm sitting here like, I didn't know those were owned by different entities, and I feel like I should know that. Where's this stuff? Thank you very much.
Knowledge is power.
They talked about the Innovative Mobility Program, which is a $20 million program. We're going to see if there are possible funding that we could apply for, we being our area could apply for. The micro grants, the $5,000 for bike helmets.
We'll take it.
Kaiser, then they're very big at providing bike helmets. So. They talked about the carbon reduction program. So as a TMA, we're getting some of those carbon reduction funds, but it also will be shared in other small areas around the state. And there's going to be some consultation with MPOs. By the way, federal guidance came out 2 weeks ago about that program for the carbon reduction program. Oh yeah, federal guidance just came out. And I already mentioned that Oregon Highway Plan is also planned to be updated. But Amanda said they are amending the Oregon Highway Plan to add tolling policy. No, there's a big tolling program and studies going forward in the Portland metro area. So I guess to be consistent, they're adding tolling policies to the highway. I think they used to have tolling policies, or they obviously have to amend them based on what's going on in Portland. And we're still waiting on census data to know if there's any new MPOs. There probably won't be any new MPOs in the area. There still possibly could be a new PMA, in other words, an MPO that's over 200,000. Not likely, but
Where? Central?
Rogue Valley thinks they might.
Oh,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Rogue Valley might. We'll see how the census works out.
Huh.
But even if there's not, when the census data comes, we will be doing potentially boundary adjustments based on where our urban area now is based on 2020 census data. And then other things the census would tell us is we have to review the federal functional classification. Wonky thing, but tell us which ones are designations. Urban arterials, rural collectors, things like that. Foreshadowing the fund that you guys will have in 3 to 7 months. Yeah, it's very long. It's just classifications for people.
That's why we have a tech. But we will attack the problem with great fortitude.
And then lastly, OMPOC sent a letter. OMPOC sent a letter after a census item was brought up. So it has to do with the geographic level of certain census data. Census wanted to limit the geographic level to either census tracts or counties on certain things that MPOs do modeling, especially want to know how many households of this kind of income or this kind of age group is in this census tract. Helps this age group of income students. They want to limit some of those demographic data to larger areas. We sent a letter to the census as OMPOC asking that they reverse course and provide more detailed demographic data for the census. And apparently they did get more feedback than just from us, issues.
That they did.
Well, we'll see how that works. Then there was just the normal roundtable. I'll mention one thing, the intermodal facility in the Albany area, making great progress and should open in August 2022.
Oh, this year, wow.
Yeah. And I was interested to find out that they're starting primarily with international exports.
Cool.
Start, and then they'll move on to imports, domestic, exporting things from that facility to foreign countries. So
That's really needed.
good for our trade, right?
Yeah, that was the whole thing was for especially for ag, to get our products out and not get stuck in the trucking bottlenecks. So this is gonna be fabulous for our region. Fabulous. Well, thank you for all of that fabulous information and for attending that when life, I don't know about all y'all, but my calendar, as everything's opened up, my calendar is closed up. It's just inundated. Did they set the next meeting, or do we know approximately when that's going to be?
Oh,
July? Is it July or? Oh, I've got it on here. It's on the 29th of July.
Kelly's.
Okay. So yeah, next OPOC is 29th of July. I should be available. Okay, tip modifications. Karen? That was your piece.
I think, actually, there's only one on here because the very first one, the Union Street project, was one that you approved last month. This is just showing you I did that. The second one is the Transportation Options Program. It was moving funding around. And I wanted to explain this a little bit because the Transportation Options Program is going from the state fiscal year to the federal fiscal year. And so which is I'm very happy for that because having these half-year fiscal years gets very confusing. And so this is a 27-month program. So we had to kind of move money around to realign what the project years were, as well as the state has extra funds that they had not yet added to the Transportation Options Program. So those funds were added. So that's why the amount has increased quite a bit. And then the amount of the CMAQ funds is what we use we provide CMAQ funds for this project. The reduction in the amount of CMAQ funds actually goes to the next program, which is in 2025, which is not actually in the STIP. So it looks like it disappears in the STIP, but we have illustrative years, so it's in our next program. So, and they knew the Transportation Options Program knew they would not be able to spend all the money in this particular time frame. So they estimated how much we would use this time, and we put the rest of it to the future so that they would have a little bit more in the future. There are other changes coming to the Transportation Options Program that we can talk about at a different time. This is just a little funding change.
And for those watching, CMAQ is the Congestion Management Air Quality Fund that we fought very hard to get a piece of a few years back. Us and in Springfield. So fabulous. Couldn't work for us. Any questions on the tip modification? Okay, let's then other business. Our next meeting, well, the next meeting of the OTC is on July 14th. Our next meeting will be on June 28th. And next TAC meeting will be on June 14th. And now we know also OMPOC will be on July 29th. Anything else we need? We'll wrap up.
It'll be a hybrid meeting again, so you can
Okay.
come.
I believe we have, I don't know if I'm going to jinx it, successfully hybrided today. So I'm going to be trying one myself here in a couple of weeks. So we're all thinking good thoughts toward everybody who is doing the transition to hybrid, that we all be very successful. Yes, thinking good thoughts. All right. Well, thank you all very much for great work today. The time is 1:30 and we are adjourned.